Now let's get to our top story. The U.S. Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has arrived in Islamabad for talks on reviving the Afghan peace process. His trip follows last week's Afghan presidential elections, which were marred by low turnout and sporadic violence. Khalilzad reached Islamabad after concluding his visit to China. A Taliban delegation headed by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar has also arrived in Islamabad for talks. Taliban spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said the delegation will hold important talks with the country's officials. The U.S. and Taliban were close to a deal last month when President Trump called off the peace process. Let's now cross over to our Islamabad correspondent, Isa Naqvi. Isa, thanks for joining us. Now that the Taliban delegation has reached Islamabad, Isa, as well as the U.S. Special Representative, what further details can you share with us at this time?
Yes, Waqar, it is quite an important development that both the Afghan delegation led by Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar and the U.S. Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Zalmay Khalilzad, they are in Islamabad, and Islamabad is now hosting the talks between Taliban and the U.S., the process that was scuttled last month after President Donald Trump's tweet. And now it is in less than a week's time that Prime Minister Imran Khan expressed the hope while he was visiting New York and has had a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump that he will play his part and Pakistan will play its part for resumption and revival of these talks. And if these talks they go through well, then Pakistan will try to play its part in bringing both the Taliban and the Afghan government on a table of negotiations. Both the parties, they are here today, and the meeting is expected to start later this evening. And the sources, they claim that if there is a positive outcome of today's meeting, then the Taliban delegation is also expected to meet senior officials of Pakistan, and they may also call on the Prime Minister.
So tell us, Isa, about the mood in the capital there. How seriously is this dialogue being taken? And is there actually likely to be an official announcement of dialogue resuming?
Waqar, so far there hasn't been a word to it since the only information that has come out so far officially has been from the spokesperson of Taliban, and he has confirmed it that the Taliban delegation is reaching Islamabad for important meetings in the federal capital of Pakistan. But the Foreign Office of Pakistan, White House and the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad, they have not officially conveyed any details or schedule of the meetings of Zalmay Khalilzad with the Taliban delegation, but sources claim that these meetings are going to take place today and they might continue tomorrow as well. And the diplomats and experts who keep an eye on the relationship between Pakistan, Afghanistan and the US and the talks process that was going on in Doha, they believe that this development in itself is very important, that after scuttling of this process, both the parties, they have decided and agreed upon meeting in Islamabad, which means that there is a possibility that if the positivity continues and they reach upon an agreement, because the process was scuttled right at the moment when there was a deal, a peace pact which was about to be signed between Taliban and the U.S. The same, the talks are going to be resumed from the very point where they were scuttled. And there is a lot of positivity, and we are looking forward to these talks taking place in Islamabad.
Very well, Isa, as always, we appreciate your reporting. Isa Naqvi, our correspondent, speaking to us there from the Pakistani capital. Let's now cross over to Major General retired Ijaz Awan, who is joining us now for his insight on this issue. General Awan, as always, thanks for joining us here at Indus News. Now, it seems both the U.S. and the Taliban general want to resolve the issues and find peace in Afghanistan. How serious do you think then today's meeting is?
There is no doubt that America desires to enter into a peace negotiation and wishes to conclude the deal which was about to be concluded, say about 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back when it was scuttled by a tweet. But my opinion is that this was done by design and not by default. Because if this deal was signed, then Taliban would have had an upper hand in the coming elections which have been recently held, and the turnout was very poor. So they never wanted, America and the Ashraf Ghani government never wanted to give an impression
So in general, I wonder, is it possible to just pick up where things were left off? Can both sides just continue the dialogue as if nothing has happened, or do you think things have changed?
In my case, if the Taliban have been marginalized in the result of these elections that were held under Ashraf Ghani government, because initially, if we recollect, Taliban were demanding these elections under an interim national setup, and they were not very confident to get them conducted by the Ashraf Ghani government. But America somehow or the other and the Ashraf Ghani government prevailed. They found an excuse for scuttling the talks or for temporarily halting the process of peace, and they went into election. So if they have got the results that they desire, then, and the Taliban have been marginalized in the outcome of election, then they may like to enter into a deal. But this may, I am afraid, this may affect the post-election stability in Afghanistan.
Very well, General Wan. We'll leave there at that, but of course we appreciate your insight today. Let's move on with the news for the moment. In a fresh act of state terrorism, occupying forces have martyred another youth in Indian-occupied Kashmir's Ganderbal district. 7 youth have been martyred by occupation forces in Naranag area of the same district this week. Earlier, Indian forces confessed to arresting 144 minors since the illegal annexation of the valley. In a report submitted to an Indian Supreme Court committee, they admitted that some of these minors were as young as 9 years old. New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout in Indian-occupied Kashmir has now entered its 59th day. Pakistan's Foreign Office has summoned the Indian Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Gaurav Ahluwalia. The Foreign Office spokesman condemned the unprovoked firing by Indian occupation forces along the line of control, killing 1 woman and injuring 3 others. Faisal urged the Indian side to respect the 2003 ceasefire arrangement, investigate these and other incidents of ceasefire violations. He also instructed Indian forces to respect the ceasefire in letter and spirit and maintain peace on the LOC and the working boundary. Indian occupation forces along the LOC have been continuously targeting civilian populated areas with artillery fire. Well, India has topped the world's league table in curbing freedom of expression on social media platforms. A UK-based tech report says New Delhi made the highest number of requests to Facebook and Google for content removal over the past 7 years. Comparitech said New Delhi has been on the censorship top spot for the last 10 years. It said India made over 77,000 requests for content removal between 2013 and 2018. The tech firm said India makes up 33% of overall requests for censorship made to Facebook. New Delhi also tops the individual list for requests made to Facebook with 70,000 complaints. Let's get to some other news now. Iran says Washington's indecision is undermining the possibility of any negotiations to de-escalate tensions. In a televised address, President Hassan Rouhani said the U.S. is sending mixed messages on bilateral talks. Rouhani said President Trump was boasting about intensifying sanctions, but EU countries told Tehran he is willing to talk. The Iranian president said European powers were continuing efforts to arrange such negotiations. Last month, Iran's president refused to meet Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly session. He said he would only hold talks with the U.S. if Trump lifts economic sanctions on Tehran. Well, the U.S. has told North Korea to stop its provocations and remain committed to nuclear negotiations. The statement follows Pyongyang allegedly firing a ballistic missile off its eastern port of Wonsan earlier today. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortega said Pyongyang should do its part to ensure peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. She said North Korea should abide by their obligations under UN Security Council resolutions. Earlier, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the missile reached Tokyo's exclusive economic zone. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe condemned the launch and expressed concern over Pyongyang's actions.
We'll hold National Security Council and will discuss about the situation and our measures. We'll continue to cooperate with the international community, especially the U.S., and will take all possible measures to protect the safety of the nationals as we stay on alert.
In Taiwan, 5 people have died while 1 is missing after a 140-meter bridge collapsed into a harbor yesterday. Rescuers are searching for the last fisherman believed to have been crushed in his boat. The National Fire Agency said 2 of the victims were workers from Indonesia and another was a Filipino. Prosecutors have launched a probe into that incident. Libya's Mitiga International Airport in the capital Tripoli has been hit by an airstrike. The UN-recognized government claims the attack was conducted by forces loyal to Eastern Commander Khalifa Haftar. Government officials say the raid set on fire a factory belonging to the Libyan Civil Aviation Authority. They say the airport has been closed, but no casualties have been reported so far. Government officials say they also thwarted 2 ground attacks by Haftar's forces on the Ramla front line. Forces loyal to Haftar launched a campaign in April to capture the capital Tripoli. According to the World Health Organization, clashes between the 2 sides have left over 1,000 people dead and have wounded nearly 6,000. In Spain, meanwhile, Catalan separatists have called for mass civil disobedience if their leaders are convicted for their part in a failed bid for secession. The 12 defendants are on trial for holding a banned referendum and issuing a short-lived declaration of independence. 18,000 protesters have taken to Barcelona streets to mark the 2nd anniversary of that referendum. Protesters chanted anti-government slogans and called for the release of their jailed leaders. The separatist momentum, though, has slowed. However, tensions have flared ahead of the Supreme Court verdict in this case later this month. And coming up next in this bulletin, an uncertain future awaits foreign ISIS orphans. And Chilean farmers face ruin as crops die out. Welcome back. The United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 1,000 migrants have died in the Mediterranean this year. This is the 6th year in a row that bleak milestone has been reached. This report has more.
Every year, thousands of migrants attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea to reach Europe. They endure a long journey in extreme conditions, during which many of them die. UNHCR spokeswoman Liz Throssell says fewer attempts to cross the Mediterranean this year show the journey is very dangerous.
Yeah, the figures do show that we have passed the very sad milestone of 1,000 deaths so far in 2019, and that is the 6th year in a row that we have passed 1,000 deaths. What I can stress is, of course, the numbers of people attempting to cross the Mediterranean are much lower, so that points to the fact that the journeys themselves are much more dangerous.
The United Nations Refugee Agency has called for more search and rescue operations to save lives at sea. The UN has also underlined the role played by charity boats in sea rescue operations. Liz Throssell said NGO rescue boats should not be criminalised.
It's important, first of all, to have the capacity there to save people lives, to rescue them from the sea. And in this, the NGO boats have played an incredibly important role. And we really stress once again that they should not be stigmatised or criminalised.
The International Organization for Migration says 15,000 people have died trying to cross the Mediterranean since 2014.
Well, at the Syrian refugee camp in Isa, an uncertain future awaits foreign ISIS orphans. Displaced Syrian women volunteer as caretakers, saying the children are still visibly scarred after living with their late parents. For more on their story, watch this report.
In a large tent housing 24 orphans, the female caretakers trace the trauma in these children and fear for their interpersonal development. Aged 18 months to 13 years old, they were born to parents from Russia, Uzbekistan, Indonesia, Tajikistan, Egypt and Iraq. With limited resources, the caretakers aim to create a safe haven for the children to grow in.
They don't like the food. The way they play together is not really playing. They play at shooting each other or planting the mines in the earth. These things are still planted in their heads because there's nothing to make them forget about it. They don't study or go and play with the little ones. It's been taken away from them.
After years of leading the fight against the militants, Syria's Kurds hold thousands in detention camps, 24 of which found their way to Anisa. The camp has received no aid for the orphans and is struggling to provide for them despite the many calls to the international community.
The other organizations have not given anything to help the children. We ask for them to give clothes, food, drink as well as to help rehabilitate them to get rid of the ISIS ideology.
As the Syrian war goes on, the affected children look towards a grim future with the remnants of their past still fresh in their minds.
Well, Chile is struggling with a crippling drought. The country is experiencing its driest decade in recorded history, with no end in sight. The high demand for water has led to an agricultural emergency, as this report explains.
The end of the driest southern winter in 6 decades has left 6 of Chile's regions bone dry. Over 600,000 people, 100,000 animals and crops are at risk due to extreme weather conditions. According to the Ministry of Agriculture, about 37,000 farmers are facing ruin. The governor of Chacabuco admits there's no easy solution towards the problem.
From now on, we have to be realistic. Climate change is a situation that is here to stay. The reality is, indeed, it is most likely that these 10 years on average become the real final average for the province.
Chile is the world's leading copper-producing country. It uses large quantities of water for the industry, which is the backbone of the economy. Locals say the country has gone dry due to bad management of water resources.
77% of the water goes there. In what situation will we find ourselves in? It's going to generate sustained drops in the levels of the underground layers, and if we don't do something now, we're going to end up with drained aquifers.
And according to the United Nations, Chile is prone to drought and desertification. President Sebastián Pinera has announced the investment of $5,000 million to cope with the drought. The country will host a global conference on climate change in December.
Well, in Norway, a fashion show highlighting the plight of Kashmiris and their freedom struggle has been arranged in Oslo. The lineup of the fashion show contained beautiful tunics in multicolored embroideries, the region's traditional wear. It wasn't a typical ramp walk. Activism and theatrics added to the spectacle, highlighting the need to preserve the valley's culture. The gesture was appreciated and particularly lauded by Kashmiris on social media. In Russia, clothing brands in Moscow are helping out in continuing the campaign for fair elections with their off-the-wall designs. The quirky looks have boomed in popularity since demonstrations in Moscow sparked a police crackdown that saw thousands detained. This report tells you more.
A riot policeman snapping handcuffs on a woman as two officers hover nearby with batons is one of the most popular shirt prints amongst young people in Moscow. In July, Russian police arrested activists and students running a campaign for fair local elections. Thousands of Moscovites protested last week demanding the release of the detainees. The items are sold to raise money for their legal defense.
The rallies that were held in Russia last summer started suddenly. We thought it through and created a t-shirt where we're saying that all that matters is freedom and love, that they shouldn't be beating up people.
Sorting the boxes of printed shirts ready for sale, Alina Muzensky, art director at Koltrap, says society is becoming stronger and more aware.
I can see in Instagram stories that there's a large number of young people who have been increasingly paying attention to injustice. That more and more people come to courts, more and more people are not afraid to put on activist clothes.
20,000 demonstrators in a recent rally demanded halt to repression against anti-government politicians and activists who were recently sentenced to 4 years in jail.
Well, Pakistan has opened its Deep Sea Gwadar port for transit trade. The Ministry of Maritime Affairs says the first shipment will arrive on October 8th and traffic will gradually increase. Officials say the port's main competitors would be Singapore and Dubai. They say incentives such as no cargo demurrage charges and 3 months storage facilities will help bring business to the port. The modern port is expected to dominate maritime trade traffic through the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean in the near future. European shares have hit a one-month low over concerns of an intensified global slowdown. Investor fears grew after a series of dismal factory reports were released across the EU and in the United States. London stocks lost around 1.5% on fresh worries over Brexit, ahead of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's final Brexit showdown with the EU. The indices of the Pan-European Stocks 600 have also seen their biggest drop of over 1% in 2 months. Frankfurt's DAX 30 and the Paris CAC 40 indexes have also slipped by 1%. The weather is like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus.